Hey Chris and Tina, uh, just making a video for you guys here on one of your studies. Just kind of going through and doing some overstaging, overscoring, showing you what I'm looking at and what I'm seeing and changing as I'm going through these studies. So I usually like to start with staging first, and so we'll dive right in. So this is all. This is all alpha. You marked it wake, so that's good. We'll just carry on to sleep onset here. And I made my mouse bigger so you can see where I'm pointing at things. So, all right, so first off, we've got wake, 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 and it looks like this is actually still wake. You still have all the same frequency as you do in the previous epoch, and the frequency is of alpha, and nothing really changed. You may have you may have noticed a little bit the eyes calmed down a little bit from the previous epoch, but you still have that full-on alpha frequency going on in the brainwaves. It looks real fuzzy throughout. And I can tell that you see there's lower frequency in here, or lower amplitude, but the frequency is still of alpha, so this would still be considered wake. So we'll call this wake, and same with this one here. Same here, all of this is wake. There's not even any sleep. That like this can be confusing as sleep because you can see little dips and stuff in here. The problem is that there's still that super fast frequency going on, even in these little dips that happen here. Um, this is maybe a sleep wave right here, this one, and maybe this one and this one, but so maybe the only sleep in here is right there and right there. So we'll call this wake and wake. And same sort of deal in here. Maybe the only sleep that I see really is in there. Uh, and yeah, maybe a tiny bit in here. Uh, but even then, in the occipital channels, you have a lot of alpha frequency. So it's really all just wake, and maybe right here is the only sleep. So we'll call this wake, wake, wake. No sleep in this one, really. Wake. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you saw to start staging two, but that's okay. We'll keep going with wake, 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 and wake, 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 and wake, wake. Now we're starting to see a little bit more sleep frequency brain waves right in here. Starting to get low amplitude mixed frequency, maybe from here to here even. You see this wave here. These are low amplitude, and that's kind of a mixed frequency, mixed frequency, mixed frequency. It's starting to calm down a little bit, but you still have alpha throughout pretty much this whole bit here, and then alpha throughout this whole bit here, which is just eyes closed, awake, and then alpha throughout this. So I think the only sleep really is in this little section, maybe this little section. So we'll call this one wake still, wake, and this one's wake, wake, wake. Now we're starting to see um, maybe a little bit of sleep in here. Um, but this is still a majority of this is still wake, wake. And see how the alpha kind of calms down right here. I think this might be our first epoch of stage 1. So we have a bit of mixed frequency happening in here, and then if this is 10 seconds, it's close enough, I think. I think there's a little arousal right there where the frequency picks back up. You can really tell in the O channels when comparing this to this. You just have a few more open spaces in this little area, and throughout all of the channels, it really kind of matches. So in this section is a little bit of sleep, and then in this section is a little bit of sleep. But if we measure this, I don't know, that might not be enough. 9 seconds, and then 4 seconds. Yeah, so that's only 13 seconds of sleep. So this one would still be wake. And then here we have a little bit of sleep here, 13 seconds. A little bit of sleep here, 2.5 seconds. So I think this is where we'll have our first epoch of stage 1, with an arousal here. 1. And then if we scroll back a little bit, it looks like maybe this, if this is, yeah, that's 10 seconds, that's 11 seconds, so we can mark this as an arousal. And this is actually a really hard, these are hard brain waves to differentiate when the patient goes from wake to sleep, because there's not a huge difference, but you can definitely see in here, you see this brainwave, this brainwave, this brainwave, this brainwave, this brainwave. They're not as tight and as frequent as these brainwaves here. I mean, these are pretty consistent and high frequency brainwaves. So this one, this is 13 seconds, so I think the rest of this is sleep at the tail end here. And we'll call this one stage 1. And then back, still stage 1, no arousal in this one. This one is very mixed frequency. You can tell throughout the whole epoch. You've got little sections right here, sections right here. It's all very mixed frequency, nothing consistent enough high frequency to, maybe at the end here, if we scroll a little bit, maybe this is a little arousal right here. I think it is actually. We'll call this one stage 1, and then this one will also be stage 1. And we're kind of cruising into some territory where you finally are marking the right things here. So this would be 1. Now there's no K complexes or spindles in this epoch, and you called this 2. So I'm going to change it to 1. Remember, K complexes and spindles stand out above baseline brainwaves. So you can see the low amplitude mixed frequency throughout this epoch, and nothing really stands out in this epoch as a K complex or a spindle. I mean, you have maybe this here is what you saw, but K complexes will go above baseline, which this kind of went above baseline, but it didn't really drop below baseline. It just kind of stayed level. So we'll keep this in 1. And same with this one, we're just going to keep it in 1. And I missed something because this is wake. So there was an arousal somewhere. And okay, yeah. I think this arousal actually turns this into wake. Um, there's no real mixed frequency, maybe a little bit right here, but you can tell the frequency in the O2 channel here, it doesn't really change from this arousal. This definitely stands out above baseline as an arousal, but as the brainwaves get smaller, there's still just as the frequency doesn't really change until about right here. And even then, it's still pretty tight, even though it's low amplitude. So I would call this one wake, and then this one wake as well. It still just looks very fuzzy to me, and not enough low amplitude mixed frequency to call. There's a little bit of some mixed frequency kind of in this area here, but not consistent enough, especially in the O1 and O2 channels for me to call stage one. So I'm going to change this to wake, and this one to wake as well. Oops. I don't know if that does anything. Um, let's go back. This one that I changed to wake, you can definitely see the alpha throughout the whole channel, especially in the O2 channel, in the O1 channel. There's no real, it doesn't really slow down and open up like stage one would look like. So we'll call this one wake, this one wake as well. There's some things going on right here that might appear to be stage one type waves, which um, maybe it is. Maybe there's a little bit of stage one right here. But I think the rest is all wake. And this is wake, wake, wake. Now we're dipping into some stage one. If I compare this epic with this epic and kind of switch back and forth between the two, you can see it really opens up in this epic here. So I think this one I would call stage one with an arousal here at the end. So we'll call this one, and this one as well is going to be one. After this arousal, if I were to drag this arousal out just a little bit, be here, and that's kind of where I see it dropping off again, and very mixed frequency, you know. So call this one, and then an arousal here, and this would stay in one, and then an arousal here, and this one would stay as one as well. And let's see, this arousal might be shorter than I thought it was originally. This here is 12 seconds, so as we're going through, I noticed this arousal here, and it kind of drags out a little bit. It could even go out to here. I think this is wake. It could stop here, but looking at the brainwaves as a whole, I can still see alpha in this channel. I still see alpha in this channel. So we'll call this wake. And then back to one. Let's see the transition. Yeah, from this arousal, it goes back to one right around here, where consistently in all of the channels, you just see these three. They just drop off with the rest of them. So this would be one, and then one again. Maybe actually a spindle here. It's not quite big enough for me to call it two because I only see that really above baseline in the F4 channel. So we're going to call this one stage one, And we're still in stage one here. Okay, and then this arousal here, I believe, starts right there. You can see the alpha start picking up. If we're comparing these brain waves that are sleep brain waves to these here, the alpha picks up in that versus right here where you have it marked. So I would mark this whole thing, and then this one would be wake. And then this is also wake. You can see, even though it's low amplitude, there's not really any mixed frequency happening in this. You even have an eye movement in this one, so I think he woke up a little bit in this. So we'll call wake, then wake again, then back to one here with an arousal. So we'll call this one. And I think just kind of looking back a little bit, I'm trying to see it kind of transitioned maybe towards the end of the epic, maybe in here. So maybe even starting right about, actually starting right about here, I think is where it transitioned off to stage one. Looking consistently throughout all the channels, looks like right here it dropped to one. So we'll call this one 1 with an arousal, then 1 again, and then we have, looks like an arousal at the end here, and this would stay in 1, and this would be 1. Looks like we have an arousal here. Sometimes if you squint your eyes a little bit, you can just see that everything's a little bit darker, and kind of looks like a pen is scribbling just a little bit harder, versus over in this section where a pen might just be scribbling a little bit softer or lighter or less frequent. So we're going to call this one stage one. And then finally, maybe a little spindle here. I would probably call that a spindle. It stands out above baseline enough for me. So we'll call this one stage two, another spindle towards the end here. So 2, we have an arousal at this one. So a majority of this epic appears to be at the beginning. Or actually, let's measure this. This is a tricky one. So that is 12 seconds, and this is 11.5 seconds. Yeah, that was too close for my eyeballs to tell. So the majority of this is stage 2 from the last epic, I think. Yeah, so a majority of this is stage 2. So we'll keep it in 2, and the next one after this will be 1 unless we see a K complex or a spindle after it. So we'll call this one stage 1, or sorry, stage 2. And looks like another arousal here. Yep. Just a little bit darker and more scribbly in this area. And we'll call this one stage 1. Maybe a spindle here, or trying to be an arousal, but looks like a spindle. And another arousal here. And this one you could almost drag out to there. So we'll call this stage 1. And it looks like we have a little bit of artifact coming through from the ECG. And I think this arousal actually starts here. If you're looking at everything as a whole, it's all kind of hard to see with ECG artifact coming through, but the alpha starts bleeding through right about here, so we're going to call this one right there. And this will be stage, how long is this? 14.5. We'll call this stage 1. This will be wake, obviously, duh. And then this one is still actually wake. You still have a lot of alpha coming through throughout the whole epic. There's not really any sleep in this epic. So we'll call this one wake. Loading. Okay, so this one again in this epic is going to be wake. Maybe a little bit of sleep happening right at the end there. We'll call that wake. And then it looks like maybe a little bit more consistent sleep happening towards the end of the epic, maybe right around here. But this is still all alpha, very fuzzy, very scribbly. Wake. Now it's starting to open up a little bit, and you can kind of see in all the channels if you're kind of squinting your eyes and uh, comparing the two epics. I'll go back one between this one and this one. You just have a lot more openness, even between the lines here. It's kind of open versus very, very, very fast. I like can't even fit my pointer into these little. My pointer's a little bigger now, but um, it's just very, very fast in this epic versus this epic. You have quite a few more brainwaves like this one and this one, this one. If I go to the beginning, we have this one and this one and this one. Um, Again, comparing to this epic here, see how fast these are and so close together, um, versus these where it's like whoop, whoop. I don't know, sound effects. Uh, whoop, you know, they're not so fast. It kind of slows down a little bit. So we'll call this one stage 1. And this one stage 1. Then here we have a spindle and it starts just before the 15-second mark. So we're going to call this 2. And another spindle there for 2. And then this looks like an arousal here. Um, yeah, so we'll drop this back to 1. Looks like a little bit of sweat artifact right now, so just to keep things a little bit easier, I'm just going to change this to 1 so that we can still see what's going on. So this still looks like stage 1, 1, 1. Some K complexes. Here's our first K complex that I've really seen that goes above baseline and then drops all the way down to here below baseline. So if I were to put my signal filter on, my reference line on, that goes well enough above baseline and then well enough below baseline for a K complex. So we'll keep this in 1 for now, and we'll mark the next one as stage 2. This next one is 2, 2, and you can still see a lot of mixed frequency in here. It's not really consistent enough. This is probably a spindle here, and then this is probably a K complex here. You can see just barely this really tall bit here coming above baseline and then dropping below baseline. It's a little messy, but it's there, and maybe another spindle right after it. So we'll keep this in 2. I don't think that's an arousal. And then 2 again. And then good arousal, I think I'd drag it out to about there. I see what you did, maybe why you only marked a little bit of it, because there is a little bit of discrepancy going on right here in the O channel. It looks a little bit like um, um, low amplitude mixed frequency, but it's like it's like 1 to 2 seconds of it. So I don't know. I just marked the whole thing. There's a chance it's not an arousal, but that's just one that I would mark. Then we'll drop it back to 1 with that arousal, with no K complexes or spindles really happening. And we'll keep it in 1 with this one. Here's a K complex. It just barely touches that reference line and then goes below right here. So the next one will be stage 2 because all of this is still stage 1. And this one I said would be 2, and it doesn't look like there was any arousals or significant changes, so we'll keep it in 2. And then back to 1, good, which you have. And then 2, good, which you have. 2, good, good. And then looks like we're kind of back on track. That's a great arousal. I would drop it just a hair shorter, but it's a good arousal. And you kept it in 2. I'm thinking this is actually still 1. I don't see any K complexes or spindles. Especially, you see K complexes in your F channels usually the best. So that's why we keep the reference lines on that F3 when we're running studies. So I'm gonna keep that in 1. Oh wait, yep, because of this arousal here, I'm gonna keep this in 1. And then 2 with the spindle here, and we'll keep this in 2. This looks like it should be an arousal, but especially between 2 respiratory events here. But you didn't mark it, and I wouldn't mark it, so good job. There's not really that alpha frequency coming through. There's a nice little spindle for you. Good arousal, and then back to wake. Good. And then you marked this as 2. This is all very much alpha. There's no sleep happening in this epic at all. So I'm not sure why you marked stage 2 here. Just maybe a little bit of training your eyes to see the frequencies. There's no K complexes, there's no spindles, it's just all alpha. The frequency is high, so we'll keep this as wake. And then it drops off. Again, comparing the last epic to this epic, you can kind of see the difference in frequency. And this just drops off right around here. And I think I'd call this one stage 1 rather than 2. And then same for this. We've got a K complex here. It goes just barely above that baseline and then drops down below baseline. So this would be stage 2, which you have. And then 2, 2, good, 2, good, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, good, and then wake, good. This one I would keep in wake. It looks like this is all maybe starts dropping off a little bit right here. I'd have to see the next epic to really tell, because he's a little bit tricky to see his brainwaves. So, but this one would be wake. And yep, this is 1. Just comparing the 2 again, I just want to try and train your eyes a little bit to see the difference between wake and stage 1 brain waves if you're just looking back and forth to see that. You just have very fuzzy looking high frequency brain waves versus mixed and sporadic kind of brain waves. Maybe a spindle here, but it's after the 15 mark. We're going to call this one stage 1. And then with that spindle in the last one, I think we'll call this stage 2. And we'll just carry on. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. This one I think I would call an arousal right here. It's just enough of a change in frequency consistent throughout all channels. Not necessarily through O1, O2. I think it kind of stops right there in the O1, O2, but you still have alpha throughout the other 4 channels, and it's 4 against 2 in that case. So for me, I would call that an arousal. So this would stay in 2 because the majority of this epoch of sleep is over here on this side. Which is stage 2 from the previous. And looks like maybe a K complex right here. Doesn't quite go below baseline, but oh well. Okay, there we go. There's a spindle, so this will stay in 2, 2, 2. And then you dropped this to stage 1 for some reason. I'm not quite sure. Maybe an accident here. There's no arousal or anything, and you didn't mark an arousal, so we'll just keep this in 2. Now we're getting close to 3. So this one we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 brainwaves kind of touching that line for I think maybe this would be stage 3. So I'm going to call it 3. And then same here, you got plenty of brainwaves going above that reference line, so I would call this one stage 3 as well. So only 2 epochs off of 3, which is really good. So and then I am just going to skip through this section of 3 because I'm not going to load through all of those epochs and waste your time. I believe you. Oops. There we go. Big arousal at the end of 3. And back to 1. Good. And then 2. Good. 2. 2. 2. Good. Here I would call an arousal. Just looks like higher frequency brainwaves happening in this section, especially, versus the rest of the epoch. So this would drop this to stage 1. And then K complex here. So this would be 1 still. And then 2. One thing that new techs really like to do that I've noticed is pretend that there are K complexes or spindles because a lot of people think stage 1 should only last a few seconds, but sometimes it can last a minute to 2 minutes to 3 minutes. If you don't see a K complex or spindle, don't be scared to just keep marking 1. You got to be able to defend yourself when you're staging, and little tiny things like this don't really count as K complexes. You know, it really has to look like this, up above baseline, down below baseline. And that's a really big one, but you get the idea. So we'll keep that in 2, and then good arousal. I'd probably just mark this whole thing. It's kind of a mess, but or at least from there to there. And then this would drop. This would drop to stage 1 then, because the majority of this is all stage 1 over here, and this is the only bit that you have stage 2 in. And then wake, good. And then we have stage 1, good. And here, I'm guessing you thought this was a K complex. I'm not really thinking that is. I think this is. You can just really see that up and down movement, whereas this, it doesn't, it has the up, but it doesn't really have the down. Maybe if I decrease it, I'd be able to see it a little better. It kind of touches. Maybe you're right. I think you're right. We'll keep it in 2. And here's an arousal. We'll call this one stage 1 because after the arousal, it's no K complexes or spindles. And then we have stage 2 here with this K complex. Good arousal, by the way. And with that arousal, you dropped it to stage 1, which was really good. And here we have K complex, a spindle. Yep, so that looks good. This one, however, I would drop to stage 1 after this arousal. There's no real K complexes or spindles after that arousal. Maybe a spindle here, definitely a spindle here. So we'll call this 1. The next one will be 2. Yep. And then here we have it, a nice little K complex, so we'll call this 2. Good arousal. I think this is an arousal here too, which is just is messy enough for me to call an arousal. It's got a little bit higher frequency going on. Right here is kind of deceiving, but I think I would call that an arousal. Well, this one's very debatable actually. I, I'm not sure I would actually call this an arousal buzzing through. I just got arousal happy looking at these 2 events in between it. So we'll keep it in 2. And 2, good arousal there. Dropping it to 1, so that's good. And then back to 2, there's a little K complex there at the end of that one, so that's good. And a spindle in that one. 2, good. Oops. I do think this is an arousal here. There's enough artifact covering up what might be an arousal. 1, and then definitely an arousal here. This one has high frequency, um, uh, and it's an abrupt shift, and that's part of the definition of an arousal is an abrupt shift in EEG frequency. It is consisting of alpha or higher, so we'll call that an arousal. Switch this one to stage, or actually, yeah, switch this one to stage 1. This looks like a K complex here. Another arousal here. You can kind of see the frequency bleeding through in the channels that you can see up in here. And then another arousal here, good. But this would be stage 1. And then we have another arousal here. This would be stage 1. Another arousal here. And some spindles still, so we'll keep it in 2, 2, 2, 2. And then back to 1, good. Then back to 1, good. Back to 2, yeah, there you go. 2, good arousal. This is actually an arousal here. It was kind of in between epics, and that's something that's going to take a bit of time getting used to. When you have an arousal crossing between two epics, it's hard to see there at the end of the epic and at the beginning of the epic, so sometimes that gets missed. Um, so just keep an eye out for that. We got 1, and this should be about the pace that I would hope as you're going through and learning that you would take these studies. It's kind of slow, but if you pay attention uh, and focus, you can run 2 studies like this. And let's see. So this one was 1. This one is 1. And then a K complex here for 2. And then an arousal for 1. K complex here. Good arousal. Sometimes like it's really depends on the person on who's marking the arousal and where they think it is. But I think it's all the way throughout that whole thing. Um, Good on 2. We got a spindle here. 2, 2, and then an arousal for 2. Okay, so this one's interesting because oops. Uh, there we go. I'm using a Mac, so all my shortcuts are a little bit different. um, Looking at this, you had this arousal here, and um, that is about 10 seconds. However, this is all sleep and this is all awake right here. This is alpha. So technically this arousal is all of this, and it kind of includes the arousal. So rather than marking 2 arousals, um, you just have to remember what you did in the last epic, and sometimes you have to go back and see, oh, yeah, that's all just wake. Wake, and then maybe sleep starting kind of in this area, maybe a little bit clearer to see in this area. Um, but I would keep this as, I think sleep maybe starts here, so I'd keep this as wake, and then 1. And then let me go back to those 2 and just compare the 2. You can definitely see the difference in frequency. It kind of it's the most consistent starting about here. And then this epic is all stage 1 except for the arousal at the end. And we've got 1 with another arousal here. And then 2, good arousal. And then another arousal, good. This would be stage 1. And I think there's another arousal here too. And a little K complex for 2. Nice little arousal there. Um, I think that would drop this. Let's see. Actually, this would stay in 2. Yep. The way I determine whether it stays in two or not is I look and see, I put the line at the 15-second mark, and you can see um, it's a little easier to see if the arousal looks bigger on this side, and that means the majority of the sleep in the epic is on this side. And so you can just call it whatever the last epic was as long as there wasn't an arousal. And if we look back, oh, there was an arousal. So this would actually be stage one all the way up until this K complex. So the only two in this epic is there, and the rest is all one. So I'm going to change this to one. And then two, and two, and then Tekken Room. Big old chunk of wake here. I'm just going to try and buzz through this. Looks like he was watching TV a little bit. Closed his eyes again. And we got a lot of alpha going on. A lot of alpha going on. Okay. So going from this one to this one, I see a amplitude decrease, but not a frequency decrease. So I'm gonna keep this in wake and keep it in wake and wake and wake, 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 and a little bit of a frequency change here. I don't think it's enough for me to call one. Actually, I do think it might be enough. It's just really, really difficult to see the difference between those two. I think it drops off. Well, if anything, I think it drops off from there to there, which might not be enough. So I'm going to keep it in wake. And I'm going to keep this in wake as well. And then this is where I'll call stage one from there and there. That's all mixed frequency. And it kind of drops off right there actually. So let me measure real quick. This is 4.5 seconds, and this is 9 seconds. So this one would also be wake in my opinion. And this is wake for sure. And then it drops off again, you can tell, from this one to this one. This one to this one, this one to this one. With an arousal there at the end. So I'll call this one stage one. And let me go back. Yeah, this arousal lasts and kind of goes till about there. A little bit of sleep again from there to there. But then he wakes up again right here. So keep this in wake. And then a little bit of sleep from there to there, 12 seconds, but then the rest is wake. So we'll just keep this in wake, and wake, wake, wake. And then it dips to one here with an arousal. Call this one one. And then wake again from there to there. So this one would be wake. And then it dips back down to one here with an arousal at the end. And you can see when I'm marking arousals, I go a little bit past, when I to the next epic. I don't keep searching, I just keep it simple. So I'll do stage 1 here. And then I did drag this out just a bit too far. So let's measure this. We've got 10 seconds. So it's enough to mark another arousal here, but not enough to mark sleep. So we'll just call this wake. And then an arousal here. But I do not think that's 10 seconds. That is 9 seconds, so we won't mark that. But there is enough sleep in this epic to mark stage 1. So we'll mark stage 1 on this one. And it looks like if I go back, here's our epic marker. Had another arousal there right at the beginning of this epic. You can kind of compare each side and see the frequency change and the difference between this. It's as you're scrolling through though, it's hard to see the change when you're just jumping from epic to epic. So that's something you just gotta start training your eyes a little bit, which is why I keep going back and forth to kind of show you the difference between the frequencies. Just kind of ignore this because this is an arousal here, but that we couldn't mark because it was too close to the one over in the last epic. But going back and forth, you can kind of see the difference in frequency. Wake. And then again, same with this one. I just marked this wake, and then going into the next one, all of this is stage 1. So if I go back and forth, you can kind of see this goes to about there, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, before it drops off into stage 1. Where was I? Lost going back and forth. Okay, so stage 1, and then another arousal here. So this would be wake. Another arousal here. This would be 1. And then I have, okay, so this arousal, I had to look back because I didn't know what happened there. This arousal goes till about there. So this would be 1 again, another arousal, and this one kind of lasts throughout the whole thing there. So this would be wake, then back to 1 with another arousal there at the end. And that arousal dips off right there. So it lasts till there. And then this is another arousal here for 1. And then we have 1 with an arousal. Oops. Another 1. And then this actually is an arousal. Let's see if this is 10 seconds. 9.5 seconds. So we won't mark that one. Call it stage 1. 1. We've got 1 still. Yeah, you're marking a lot of 2 here without K complexes or arousals, so just keep that in mind. Our first K complex here in a while, so we'll call this one 2. An arousal, which means this will be 1. Another arousal. 1. Another arousal. 1. Another arousal. And another arousal at the end, if it's long enough. 3.5 seconds. So we've got 1 and then a K complex at the end. We'll keep this in 1. and then 2, and then 2, 2, 2. And we're back on track. So sleep onset for this patient seemed to be a little bit difficult for you, but um, hopefully with some of this training, you'll be able to see it a little bit better as I've been flipping back and forth between the two epics. All this looks really good on with stage 2. I'd call this one stage 3 here, and then back to 2. Just because you have, sometimes I forget to explain myself. You have a lot of brain waves here, delta waves, and that is 7 seconds of delta waves right there, which is enough to mark stage 3. All you need is 6 seconds of stage 3 brain waves to mark stage 3. Okay. I'm going the wrong way. And same here, I'd mark stage 3. There's enough brainwaves here crossing over that reference line, especially over here, over here, over here. So 3. And I'm just kind of guessing that those are 6 seconds. And then you kind of started the chunk of stage 3 here. So that all looks fine. Wake. And this arousal, I think it ends right about here. Um, we'll measure this 11 seconds. So that is enough space to mark this arousal here. And then I'd call this one stage 1 rather than 2. And then here we are with this 1, 2, 2. This study is actually um, very tricky study. Um, so it just takes a little bit of time to get through it. All this looks good though. Good start at 3. Okay, so here, from here to here, I think this is where it drops off to stage 2. So if I look back, you have all these big old brain waves and then kind of drops off. So I'll call this one stage 2, and then this one stage 2 as well. And then this is where you started REM perfectly. You even have an eye movement right here for it. So very nice job. Good arousal. Good arousal again. I'd call this, so this arousal, you can see the alpha. If I scroll a little bit, it just kind of keeps going until about here. Um, well, until, I don't know, till about here maybe even. So I would call this one wake, and then back to REM on the next one. And good, no chin tone. Um, yeah, no chin tone here, so no arousal. That was good. It does have alpha, so in any other case, you would mark this as an arousal, right? But because we're in REM, you need the chin tone and the abrupt shift in EEG frequency. Kind of cruising through REM. I think this one is an arousal here. You have the chin tone and you have the alpha to mark an arousal. Which means from this arousal, we need to assume that it's stage one, right? Um, but it looks like maybe you retro scored from eye movements. Yeah, so then we have eye movements. So from here, we go back all the way until we see a K complex or a spindle or chin tone, which will take us back to this, take us back to the arousal there. So I think it is still REM. Here, I do think there's an arousal. You have a bit of chin tone here. You can mark that whole thing. Even when there's chin tone towards the end, you can go back to the beginning of the alpha and mark the whole thing. Okay, so same here, we got chin tone, so we can mark this as an arousal. But still we have eye movement, so it doesn't change our staging in this epic. Yeah, so like this, when you have this chin tone, you can mark the alpha from where the alpha starts. So like that whole thing would be the arousal, which would make this wake, wake, wake. A little bit of one in here, but this is wake. And then one, arousal, one, and then back to REM. We need to retro score from this eye movement back to our last K complex spindle. Okay, so it's here. So this one would be REM, which it might have been. I might have changed it. If you have questions about REM and what I'm talking about when I retro score, let me know. Send me an email or something, and I'll go into depth a little bit further next time we talk about REM. Okay, good staging here. There's a good chunk of REM, good wake, good REM again, because we have the eye movement, retro score back to probably about here. Oops. So around here is where REM starts after, it just starts right after wake. Oops. And then an arousal here. Looks like an arousal here. Good chunk of REM here. Must have been close to being treated and titrated well. An arousal here. Just because you have the chin tone and you have alpha. But then it drops right back into REM with the eye movement. Okay, let's see. Eye movement. And then arousal for wake. And this would be wake up until there. You can see alpha bleeding through, kind of throughout this whole section here. And then it kind of drops off right here. So I would keep this in wake. And then back to 1, no K complexes or spindles. If you maybe thought that this was a spindle, it's just the frequency is not fast enough. This looks like mixed frequency stage 1 stuff. The next spindle, I wish I could have two back-to-back comparisons, but the next spindle I'll show you, it's a lot faster frequency than this. Um, yep. And then this is still 1. See how this goes above baseline, but doesn't drop below baseline? That's not a K complex, so this would be 1. Now this one does go above baseline and below baseline, so this one does have a K complex. We'll call it 2. Well, yeah, it's just before the 15-second. 2, 2, 2. So the study is getting quite a bit easier to stage and score, I'm guessing, because you have them titrated now, so it looks like they're sleeping a lot better. Okay. I would call this one stage 3, and then back to 2, and then back to 3, 3, and then back to 2. 2, back to 3, which you have it. And then it looks like he chunk scored this section here, which is okay. Good chunk of 3. Just keep in mind with the AASM, your ISR inner scores, they literally measure every single brainwave and determine whether it's a delta wave or not before they mark it 3, which is a little bit different than what we do in lab. We kind of chunk score all of this when some of these epics in here might be stage 2 according to the AASM ISRs. Um, so we are okay. It's acceptable for us to do this because we can't be measuring out every single brainwave during the night. There are some shortcuts we take to kind of improve our speed and stay on top of things. Um, but when you're taking those tests, just kind of keep an eye out for that stuff. The rest of this looks really good. Really good. Oop, one arousal here. Changing this to stage 1 and then 2. And then lights on. Good. Good, good. So I'm gonna go to our scoring and we'll plug away at this. Excuse me. Let's start from the beginning here. Okay. So, oops. This one is just not quite long enough, and I don't think it would be considered an obstructive apnea either. This one, however, you can mark as a hypopnea. It's got this breath and this breath included in the event. Again, you mark hypopneas based on the can flow. And so if you have like there's some pretty obvious flow happening right now in these. It's very, very obvious that there's still airflow, and it's obvious that there's airflow still in the can flow as well. So you want to mark these as hypopneas, not obstructive apneas, because remember, obstructive apneas are they're flat. Um, there's no airflow or 90% reduction in airflow. So those would all be hypopneas. Same with this one here. And this one here. And then this one here, because this will still correlate to the arousal, I think. There we go. And don't forget, you can mark hypopneas when there's an arousal, although we might have added that arousal in. And then there's a hypopnea there with a DSAT. Yeah, these are all good. It's all good. Yep, those are all good. I would mark this one here with this DSAT. Um, the lowest point of the DSAT is right here at the end of the little auto scored blurb, right? So this is where the lowest point is, and usually you go back about 20 seconds or so, and that's where your event's going to be. And it should be fairly consistent with uh, what the patient has looked like throughout the entire night. Good, very good. Good. Yeah, my computer is kind of taking its sweet little time. I'm working remotely, so it's a little slow going as I go through, but we'll get there. Okay, so that looks all good. This one is a flat line here, so I think this actually is an obstructive, but it's probably, yeah, there we go. And then a hypopnea there. Boom. This one is a flat line, so I would mark it as an obstructive. And then this one as an obstructive as well. See how you have a flat line in the can flow, but there's still flow in the thermistor flow? I think that is when you keep it as a hypopnea as well, because they don't line up, and the T flow is a little bit more sensitive. So when the T flow is a flat line, that's when you can mark an obstructive apnea. So this one is kind of pushing it. Um, The one that I just changed right there is kind of pushing it, but I don't think this is an actual breath. I think maybe there's a tiny breath there. But yeah, this one is probably a little bit debatable. I'll just keep it as a hypopnea for now. Okay. Yep. This one I would mark as a hypopnea here. And then same here, I would mark this one as a hypopnea. But maybe I had added that arousal. I mark a hypopnea here. Oh, looks like this one here has a DSAT. Remember, the DSATs go like this: event, DSAT after, event, DSAT after. They're not directly on top of each other like this: event, DSAT. So we have boom, 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 and then here's one, and that would go here: boom, boom, boom. And this one doesn't have one, right? So you didn't mark it, so that's good. And then here's one, and actually, looks like there might be a little chunk of this that's obstructive, but it's just not long enough, so we'll keep marking this. And then here we have an even longer event here that goes with that, and then same with this one here. And then we have more events here that you missed. One thing that usually happens that I've seen frequently is uh, you just went in to start your, why is that not red? Huh, should be red. That's weird, I have it as orange red. Okay, you just went in to start CPAP here, and I think what happened is you didn't go back to mark the events. Um, you just you yeah, I think that's what happened. It happens all the time. So just whenever you go in to start CPAP, make sure you go back and catch up properly. It's just one of those things that gets missed. Okay, so it looked like he was kind of having some central type stuff at the beginning here. Oh no, what happened? And then you did mark those centrals, so that's good. I think maybe you missed one here, 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 here. And then this would be, that should be a hypopnea because you still have flow right there. And then this one should be a hypopnea. 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 this one, this one, this one, this one. It looks like he was cruising there for a little bit. Looks like you marked a central hypopnea. Um, yeah, can't mark this one, can't mark this one, you can mark this one, so good job there. And just remember, you don't increase for centrals right away. You kind of want to wait and see what's going on. Don't forget your hypopneas before arousals. You don't need a DSAT for hypopneas. You do need a DSAT for obstructives. And see how there's still flow here? You marked a central apnea, but there's still flow. There's flow there, there's flow there. So I would probably call this a hypopnea. Well, I definitely would. And same with this one. And then this one would also be a hypopnea. And then same here. And another thing about hypopneas, or actually another thing about centrals and obstructives is generally speaking, you really don't see central apnea or central hypopneas in REM. Um, that might be the ideology of that is a question for the doctors. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but centrals kind of go away during REM sleep, and if they're having events, usually they're obstructive in nature. Um, so obstructive hypopneas or obstructive apneas. Like this is not a central hypopnea. This is just a regular old hypopnea, especially in REM. So same here, looks like you missed a good chunk of events. Okay. Looks like he increased all the way up to 10 at this point. Do you have BiPAP on? I think you did. You started this guy with BiPAP, which was a really good idea when he was really uncomfortable with CPAP. Generally, insurance companies need a good reason for them to give you a BiPAP machine. But a good enough reason is not tolerating the CPAP machine. So we tried the CPAP, or you guys tried it on him for like a few minutes, and he was freaking out. And then he just, he decided to try BiPAP, and it seemed to work a lot better for him. And that's something that you can definitely do. I would try other masks first with CPAP, just because it can tend to work sometimes. But it looks like BiPAP really helped this person, anyways. Got him on 11/7, and he's sort of normalized. And there's no leg movements that I saw during any of this either, so but that's another thing I do when I'm looking for events that can kind of take some time to for your eyes to catch and see. Um, but in one of your last studies I made a video for with no audio, it looked like there were some leg movements that you missed, but there were also a lot of leg movements that you got, so I wasn't too worried about it. Uh, but that's that for this study. It's about an hour and a half video. I hope this was informative for you, and I will see you in the next one.